The underestimated. Never underestimate someone who has nothing to lose. I still remember that chilly October morning when I first discovered what Jake had been doing behind my back. The betrayal hit like a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air in our home office. On the screen before me was undeniable evidence that my business partner, my husband of 12 years, had been systematically stealing from our company for over 2 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning.
Part 1.
The perfect partnership. When I met Jake Donovan at that startup conference in Chicago, I was 28 and already making waves in digital marketing. I'd built a solid reputation as a social media strategist, helping small businesses dramatically increase their online engagement. Jake was 32, charismatic, with an MBA from Wharton and a background in finance that complemented my creative skills perfectly. "You know what your clients really need?" he'd said after I'd finished my presentation. "Someone who can translate all that engagement into actual revenue." That's where most social media consultants fall short. He wasn't wrong. And over coffee that turned into dinner that turned into breakfast the next morning, we sketched out the framework for what would become Engagemetrics, a comprehensive digital marketing platform that not only boosted social engagement, but tied it directly to sales metrics. Within 3 years, we had a thriving business, a beautiful wedding in Napa Valley, and a shared vision of building something lasting together. We were the power couple everyone envied, me with my instinct for viral content and deep understanding of algorithms, Jake with his financial acumen and pitch-perfect investor relations. "We're unstoppable together," he'd whisper in my ear at night. "My brain, your heart, the perfect combination." I believed him. God, I believed him completely. Engagemetrics grew rapidly. By year 5, we had offices in Chicago, Denver, and Austin. A team of 48 talented people. A valuation that made my parents' eyes bulge when I finally admitted the numbers to them. Jake handled the finances, while I focused on product development and client relationships. It seemed like the ideal division of labor. "You don't need to worry about that side of things," Jake would say whenever I asked about our financial reports. "That's why we're such a good team. You focus on what you do best." Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. The way he'd close his laptop whenever I entered his office. The vague answers about certain expenditures. The increasingly lavish personal purchases, the Porsche, the lake house in Wisconsin, the art collection, all while telling me we needed to be conservative with company spending. "We should reinvest in the business," I'd argue. "Our analytics team needs more resources, and we're losing good people to competitors who pay better." "Trust me," he'd say, flashing that smile that had once made my heart race. "I know what I'm doing." And I did trust him. Until that October morning, when I didn't.
Part 2.
The discovery. It started with a simple email mistake. Jake had been logged into his account on our shared home computer and had forgotten to sign out. I needed to check something for a client meeting and found myself staring at his inbox instead of mine. I was about to close it when a subject line caught my eye. "Offshore transfer confirmation, October." I shouldn't have opened it. In a healthy marriage, I wouldn't have. But something had been off for months. Not just in our business, but in our relationship. Jake had been distant, irritable, quick to dismiss my concerns about the company's seemingly stagnant growth despite our expanding client list. The email was from a bank in the Cayman Islands, confirming a transfer of $175,000. This wasn't the first such transfer. The email referenced a monthly schedule dating back nearly 2 years. My hands shaking, I dug deeper. Within an hour, I had uncovered the elaborate scheme Jake had constructed. Fake vendor contracts, inflated expense reports, client payments diverted to accounts I had no knowledge of. According to my rough calculations, he had embezzled nearly $4.2 million from our company, our shared dream. I sat there, numb, as the magnitude of the betrayal washed over me. This wasn't just about the money, though that was devastating enough. This was about Jake systematically undermining everything we had built together while looking me in the eye day after day, night after night, and telling me he loved me. I must have sat there for hours, cycling through shock, devastation, and finally, a cold, clarifying anger. By the time I heard Jake's key in the front door that evening, I had made my decision. I closed the browser, wiped away my tears, and plastered on the same fake smile he'd been wearing for years. "How was your day?" I asked, as though my world hadn't just imploded. "The usual," he said, loosening his tie. "That new client in Phoenix is being difficult again." There was no new client in Phoenix. That was another lie, one I might never have discovered if not for his carelessness with his email. "I'm thinking about taking a girls' trip next weekend," I said casually. "Melissa's been begging me to come to New York." Jake looked relieved, probably at the prospect of having the house to himself to conduct more of his secret business. "You should go. You've been working too hard lately." I smiled and kissed his cheek. "That's what I thought you'd say." I didn't go to New York that weekend. Instead, I set in motion a plan that would take me 8 excruciating months to execute. 8 months of living with a man I now knew was a stranger, pretending nothing had changed while I methodically gathered evidence and positioned myself for what would come next. Because Jake had been right about one thing. We were the perfect combination. My creativity and his financial expertise. Only now, I would use every ounce of my creative problem-solving to dismantle the house of cards he had built. And I would do it so carefully, so strategically, that he would never see it coming. After all, he had been underestimating me for years. It was time to show him exactly how costly that mistake would be. Part 3. The long game. The first thing I did was secure my own attorney, someone with no connection to Jake or any of our mutual contacts. Meredith Chen was a former prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime and had a reputation for being both brilliant and discreet. "You need to understand something," she told me during our first meeting in a coffee shop 2 cities away from where Jake might run into anyone who knew us. "What you're describing is criminal activity. If you take this route, your husband could go to prison." "I understand," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "And you should also know that as his spouse and business partner, you could face scrutiny yourself. The authorities might question how you couldn't have known what was happening." That possibility had kept me awake for nights. "I've brought everything I've found so far," I said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "It shows that Jake systematically kept me away from the financial side while maintaining the appearance of transparency with simplified reports that looked legitimate." Meredith nodded. "Smart first step. But we'll need more. And you'll need to decide what outcome you want here. Justice? Financial recovery? Or just a clean break?" I considered her question carefully. "I want 3 things. I want to save the company, I want what he stole returned, and I want him to never be able to do this to anyone else again. Then we have work to do." Over the next several months, I became an actress deserving of an Oscar. By day, I was the same devoted wife and passionate entrepreneur I'd always been. I maintained our routine, asked Jake for advice on client strategies, even planned a surprise party for his birthday in December. But in stolen moments, late nights when he thought I was working, lunch breaks spent in Meredith's office, early mornings before he woke, I was meticulously building my case. I installed keyloggers on our home devices, legally questionable, but Meredith helped me understand the risks. I recovered deleted files. I created a separate secure email account and communicated with a forensic accountant who painstakingly reconstructed the trail of Jake's embezzlement. The hardest part wasn't the deception or the long hours of secret investigation. It was continuing to share a bed with him, to accept his kisses and occasional romantic gestures, knowing what I knew. Each "I love you" from his lips felt like another betrayal, and it took everything I had not to confront him, not to scream the truth in his face. But that would have ruined everything. Jake was smart, not as smart as he thought he was, but smart enough to destroy evidence and possibly leave me with nothing if he realized I was onto him. So I bided my time and watched for opportunities. And in February, for months into my investigation, one presented itself. "I'm thinking about our expansion plans," I said casually over dinner one night. "I think we should consider opening a London office next year." Jake's eyes lit up, not with excitement for our business, I now realized, but with the prospect of new financial streams to divert. International expansion would be huge for us. But the regulatory environment is complex. We'd need to restructure some things. I was thinking the same thing, I replied, my heart racing despite my calm exterior. Actually, I've been wanting to understand our company's structure better. Could you walk me through it sometime? Just so I can speak more confidently with clients about our global capabilities. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Sure, but it's pretty dry stuff. You've never been interested in that side before. I shrugged. I think it's time I learn more about the financial architecture. You're always saying we're partners in everything. That appealed to his ego, the idea that I was finally taking interest in his domain, acknowledging his expertise. How about this weekend? We can go through it over breakfast Saturday. That Saturday morning lesson gave me access to password-protected documents I'd been unable to reach before. Jake, so confident in his intellectual superiority, never considered that my questions weren't coming from ignorance, but were strategically designed to extract exactly the information I needed. By May, 6 months into my secret investigation, I had enough evidence to move forward. The offshore accounts, the falsified vendor contracts, the systematic theft disguised as legitimate business expenses. With Meredith's guidance, I had also taken steps to protect myself, establishing that I had been deliberately kept in the dark, documenting every instance where Jake had misled me or excluded me from financial decisions. I had also been quietly building relationships with our key clients and team members, ensuring they connected with me personally rather than seeing me merely as Jake's wife. I started small mentorship programs within the company, hosted client appreciation events, and made myself the face of EngageMetric's thought leadership. If things went as planned, I would need these relationships intact when everything exploded. In June, I made my final preparations. I opened personal bank accounts Jake knew nothing about. I backed up all our company data on secure servers only I could access. I consulted with our company's board members individually, carefully framing these as routine strategy discussions while assessing who might support me when the truth came out. And I did one more thing. I started dropping subtle hints to Jake that I was considering stepping back from day-to-day operations. I've been thinking about taking a sabbatical, I mentioned one evening. Maybe 3 months to travel and recharge. The company's stable enough now, and you've always been the one keeping the engines running smoothly. Really? He couldn't quite hide his excitement at the prospect of having complete control. I think that could be good for you. You have seemed a bit burned out lately. I smiled, thinking of how perfectly he was falling into place in my chess game. I'm glad you understand. I've been thinking September might be good timing. Jake readily agreed, probably already calculating how much more he could siphon off without my presence. What he didn't know was that September would indeed be a turning point, just not the one he was anticipating. Part 4. The Reckoning. On a sweltering day in early August, everything was finally in place. I had spent the previous evening reviewing everything with Meredith one last time. Once we file these reports with the SEC and FBI, there's no turning back, she warned. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do? I thought about the 12 years I'd spent with Jake, the dreams we'd shared, the business we'd built from nothing, and the breathtaking betrayal that had undermined it all. I'm certain, I said firmly. Do it. The next morning, I woke before Jake and made coffee as usual. We sat at our kitchen island, sunlight streaming through the windows, creating a deceptively peaceful scene. I have a full day of meetings, he said, scrolling through his phone. Don't wait up tonight. The Seattle deal is in final negotiations. There was no Seattle deal. That was yet another fiction in the elaborate web of lies he'd constructed. Actually, I said calmly, you should probably clear your schedule today. He looked up, annoyed at the suggestion. Why would I do that? I slid a folder across the counter toward him. Because in approximately 45 minutes, agents from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division will be arriving at our office with a warrant to seize our company records and your personal financial documents. For a moment, he just stared at me, incomprehension on his face. Then he opened the folder and saw copies of the evidence I'd compiled, the offshore account statements, the wire transfer records, the falsified contracts. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his face flushing red. "Have you been spying on me?" "I've been investigating you," I corrected. "For the past 8 months, ever since I discovered you've stolen over $4 million from our company." He stood so abruptly his chair toppled backward. "You had no right. Those accounts, those are legitimate business expenses. You've never understood the financial side." "That's what you were counting on, wasn't it?" I remained seated, oddly calm now that the moment had finally arrived. "That I'd never look closely at the numbers, because I trusted you completely." He switched tactics, his voice softening. "Allie, listen to me. Whatever you think you found, there's an explanation. We can work through this together. You and me, like always." "There's already a team of forensic accountants working through it," I said. "They've documented everything. Every false invoice, every diverted payment, every dollar you stole from us." "From us?" he scoffed, his conciliatory tone evaporating. "There would be no us without me. I built the financial structure of this company from nothing. You just post pretty pictures on Instagram and chat with clients who adore you because you're charming. I did the real work." And there it was, the truth I had suspected but needed to hear. Jake had never seen me as an equal partner. Despite my ideas forming the foundation of our business, despite my relationships bringing in most of our major clients, despite my strategies driving our growth, he had convinced himself that he was the true genius behind our success. "If you did the real work," I said quietly, "why did you need to steal?" "A true partner would have negotiated for what they felt they deserved." "I deserved all of it," he shouted, mask fully dropped now. "You have no idea the pressure I've been under, the sacrifices I've made." "Save it for your attorney," I advised, standing up. "You'll need a good one." His eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing. You won't go through with this. It would destroy the company. It would destroy you." I picked up my purse and the small overnight bag I had packed earlier. "The company will survive. I've spent months making sure of that. The board has already been briefed, and they're meeting this morning to formally remove you and install me as interim CEO. They can't do that without my shares," he said, but I could see doubt creeping into his expression. "Your voting rights are suspended pending the investigation, as per Section 8.3 of our operating agreement." I moved toward the door. "You really should have let me read those boring financial documents years ago. I might have negotiated better terms for you." He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing my arm. "You can't do this to me." I looked pointedly at his hand until he released me. "It's already done. The FBI has everything. The SEC has everything. And as of 20 minutes ago, when the documents were delivered to your parents' house, your family has everything too." That last part staggered him. Jake's father was a retired judge, his mother a former prosecutor. Their ethical standards were uncompromising, their reputations impeccable. They had been so proud of their son's success. "You involved my parents?" His voice was barely a whisper. "They deserve to hear it from me before it hits the news," I said. "Unlike you, I don't betray the people I claim to love." As if on cue, his phone began ringing. He glanced at it, saw his father's name on the screen, and let it go to voicemail. "One more thing," I said, pausing at the door. "In case you're getting any ideas about running, your passport has been flagged. And those offshore accounts you thought were so cleverly hidden? They've been frozen pending investigation." The look of devastation on his face should have brought me satisfaction. Instead, I felt only a profound sadness for the years and trust one had lost. Goodbye, Jake. I walked out the door of our home for the last time, climbed into the waiting car where Meredith sat ready to escort me to a temporary apartment I'd secured weeks earlier. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the house or the man I was leaving behind. The next 72 hours were a blur of activity. The FBI raid on our offices made local business news by that afternoon. Jake's arrest at our home followed hours later, after agents found additional evidence in his home office safe, including a second passport under a different name. The company's leadership team and board rallied around me admirably. Many expressed shock, though a few admitted they had harbored suspicions about certain financial discrepancies, but had been assured by Jake that everything was properly structured for tax efficiency. Our employees were understandably shaken. I called an all-hands meeting where I laid out what had happened in broad strokes, announced the leadership transition, and most importantly, assured everyone that their jobs were secure. The company was financially sound despite Jake's theft, a testament to how profitable our business model truly was. Clients were harder. Some immediately announced they were reviewing our contracts. Others demanded emergency meetings to receive assurances. A few publicly distanced themselves from us on social media, triggering a minor crisis that my team and I worked around the clock to contain. But we weathered those initial storms. I moved into my office at the company headquarters, working 16-hour days, determined to save what we had built despite Jake's betrayal. I addressed concerns personally, meeting with clients, reassuring employees, speaking directly to industry publications to control the narrative. 3 weeks after Jake's arrest, when he was out on bail and awaiting trial, he finally reached out through his attorney, offering a deal. He would relinquish all claims to the company in exchange for me dropping the charges. My response was simple. Tell Mr. Donovan that he is welcome to cooperate with authorities to reduce his sentence, but the decision to prosecute was never mine to make. The evidence has been turned over to the FBI and SEC, and they will proceed regardless of my wishes. It was true, technically. But Jake didn't need to know how instrumental I had been in building the case against him, or how determined I was to see it through.
Part 5.
The rebirth. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Running a company under public scrutiny, dealing with the legal aftermath of Jake's crimes, finalizing our divorce, and rebuilding my personal life took every ounce of strength I possessed. But strangely, I found myself thriving under the pressure. Without Jake's secretive financial manipulations holding us back, I was able to implement changes I had long advocated for. Better compensation for our team, increased investment in new technologies, a more transparent corporate structure. We rebranded from Engage Metrics to TrustFlow Digital, symbolizing both our commitment to transparent business practices and the renewed focus on authentic client relationships. The criminal case against Jake proceeded slowly through the justice system. He hired a team of high-powered attorneys who filed motion after motion, seeking to exclude evidence and delay proceedings. But the case against him was solid. The forensic accountants had traced every penny, documenting years of systematic theft and fraud. 9 months after his arrest, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a lengthy trial, Jake accepted a plea deal, guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion in exchange for a reduced sentence of 7 years in federal prison and restitution of all stolen funds. The day of his sentencing, I sat in the courtroom, watching as the once confident man I had loved stood diminished in his dark suit, his family conspicuously absent. When offered the chance to address the court, he spoke briefly of regrettable errors in judgment, but stopped short of a full apology. Then, surprisingly, he turned to face me directly. Allie, I know you think I never respected your contributions. But the truth is, I always knew you were the heart of our success. I just couldn't bear being second to anyone, not even you. It was as close to honesty as Jake had ever come with me. I met his gaze steadily, but offered no response. Whatever closure he sought would have to come from within himself during the years of incarceration ahead. As for me, I focused on rebuilding not just the company but myself. The woman who had trusted so completely was gone, replaced by someone more cautious, but also more confident in her own abilities. I established a mentorship program for women in tech entrepreneurship, sharing the hard lessons I'd learned about business partnerships and financial vigilance. 2 years after Jake's sentencing, TrustFlow Digital had not only recovered from the scandal but was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. We had doubled our client base, expanded to international markets legitimately, and been recognized as one of the fastest-growing women-led companies in the tech sector. My personal life had transformed too. I had reconnected with old friends neglected during my marriage, developed new relationships, and even begun cautiously dating again. The betrayal had left its scars, but I refused to let it define my capacity for connection. One evening, after a particularly successful quarterly board meeting, I found myself alone in my office, looking out at the Chicago skyline as sunset painted the glass towers in shades of gold and pink. On my desk sat the latest issue of Forbes, featuring a cover story on corporate resilience, with trust flow highlighted as a case study in overcoming crisis. My phone chimed with a text from my sister. Saw the Forbes piece. So proud of you. Who would have thought that the worst thing that ever happened to you would lead to all this? I smiled, thinking of the long, painful journey from that October morning discovery to this moment of genuine success and hard-won peace. Jake had been right about one thing. We had been the perfect combination of skills. He just never understood that those skills existed independently in me as well as in him. He had underestimated me, assuming that without him, I would be lost. Instead, his betrayal had forced me to recognize strengths I hadn't known I possessed: resilience, strategic thinking, leadership under pressure, and the courage to stand alone when necessary. I texted my sister back. Not the worst thing, the most clarifying thing. Then I gathered my things and headed out, nodding to the few team members still working late. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to build something meaningful and lasting. But unlike before, I now moved forward with my eyes wide open, trusting in my own capabilities and the authentic partnerships I had cultivated. Jake had thought he was stealing from our company. In reality, he had given me something invaluable: the knowledge that I was more than enough on my own. And that was a victory no one could ever take away from me.
The end.